The sky over Sodom is clear. No clouds, no wind, just a flat, ordinary morning, the kind nobody bothers to remember. And then it isn't ordinary anymore. You can picture Lot standing at the edge of the city, out of breath, his hands still shaking from being pulled through the gate before dawn. Behind him, his daughters. Beside him, a wife who cannot stop looking back. And above all of them, something starts to fall from a sky that had nothing in it a moment ago. Fire. Not lightning, not a storm. Fire falling straight down, like rain that burns instead of soaks. This is the first time it happens in the Bible. It will not be the last. Fire falls again on a mountain in front of 450 prophets who mocked a man for believing in a God they couldn't see. Fire falls again on a temple the moment a king finishes building it. Fire falls on two men who tried to worship on their own terms instead of God's. Fire falls on a threshing floor, on a rock in front of a farmer too scared to believe he'd been chosen for anything. Here's what most people miss. Every single time fire falls from heaven in Scripture, something ends and something else begins. A city, a rebellion, a doubt, a life. But there is one time, when fire falls from heaven and does not destroy a single thing it touches. It lands on people, ordinary people, standing in a room, and instead of burning them to ash, it changes what they are able to do for the rest of their lives. We will get there, but not yet. This is not a story about a weather pattern. This is not a story about coincidence. This is not a story about something that only mattered to people who lived 3,000 years ago. This is a story about a God who has one signature move for the moments that matter most in human history, and he has used it again and again and again, right up until the moment it landed on you. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you will never read the words, "Fire fell from heaven," the same way again.
Start with Gideon. He is not a soldier. He is not a leader. When you meet him in the book of Judges, he is threshing wheat inside a winepress, hiding from raiders, trying not to be seen by anyone at all. An angel finds him anyway, calls him a mighty man of valor, which must have sounded like a joke to a man crouched in a hole in the ground. Gideon doesn't believe it. He asks for proof, not once, but twice. So he brings an offering, meat and unleavened bread laid out on a rock, and the angel touches the offering with the tip of a staff. Fire rises up out of that rock right there and consumes the meat and the bread in an instant. You can imagine what that does to a man who spent the whole conversation arguing that he wasn't the right person for the job. The fire wasn't just an answer, it was a signature. God putting his name on a calling Gideon didn't think he deserved. That's the first thing fire does in Scripture. It confirms. It says, this is real and it's happening to you. But it gets stranger. Move to the book of Leviticus, to the newly built tabernacle, the first time Israel's priests ever perform a sacrifice. Aaron lifts his hands and blesses the people, and fire comes out from before the Lord and consumes the burnt offering on the altar. The people see it, and they fall on their faces, shouting for joy. This is the same fire that touched Gideon's rock. Confirmation, blessing, God showing up exactly when he said he would. And then, in the very next chapter, Aaron's own sons take that same fire and use it wrong. Nadab and Abihu are priests, young men, newly ordained, standing where their father just stood a moment before. And they take their censers, put incense in them, and offer what the text calls strange fire, fire the Lord had not commanded. The Hebrew word is zar. It means foreign. Fire brought on their own terms instead of God's. Fire comes out from the Lord again, but this time it does not bless. It devours them, right there, in front of their father, in front of the whole camp. Here's the part nobody tells you. It is the exact same fire, same source, same power. The only difference is obedience. One offering was received, the other one killed the men who brought it. You start to understand that this fire was never a force of nature. It was never random. It was a response to faith or to presumption, to an altar built God's way or to hands doing something God never asked for. Now go back to that morning outside Sodom, because there's more to that story than just the fire falling. Before it fell, Abraham stood in front of the Lord and bargained. He asked whether God would spare the city for 50 righteous people, then 45, then 30, then 10. Each time God agreed, not because Abraham talked him into mercy he didn't already have, but because that was always who God was, patient, willing to relent, searching a wicked city for anyone worth saving. There weren't 10. There weren't even 5. 2 angels had to physically grab Lot's hand and drag him out of the city gate, because even with fire already on the horizon, he hesitated. You can feel the tension in that moment. A city given chance after chance. A man who still doesn't want to leave what's familiar, even though it's about to be ash. And then the fire falls, and Sodom and the cities around it are gone, in what feels in the text like the space of a single morning. 3 stories, a rock, an altar, a city, and in every one of them fire draws a line. Before this moment and after it, there is no going back to what things were.
So far, fire has meant 3 things to you: confirmation on a rock, blessing and judgment from the exact same source, final judgment on a city that ran out of chances. And every time it marks the same line, before and after. If this is the kind of pattern you want laid out for you across the entire Bible, hit subscribe now, because it only gets bigger from here. We are about to leave personal stories behind and step into moments where fire falls in front of entire nations. Hold that thought, because what happens next involves 250 men, a king, and a mountain that Israel never forgot. Numbers has always been at the edge of rebellion, but under Moses and Aaron, it finally breaks into the open. A man named Korah, a Levite, someone who already had a place of service in the tabernacle, decides that isn't enough. He gathers 250 leaders of Israel, men with names and reputations, and confronts Moses in front of the whole camp. Their complaint sounds almost reasonable. You take too much on yourselves. The whole congregation is holy. Why do you set yourselves above the rest of us? You can hear how good that argument sounds, especially to people who don't know they're being led toward disaster. Moses tells them to bring their censers the next morning and let God decide who is holy. 250 men show up, each one convinced he's in the right. Fire comes out from the Lord, and it does not stop for status or confidence or numbers. It consumes every one of them at the entrance of the tabernacle, right where they were standing to make their case. Pay attention to this. Korah wasn't an outsider mocking God. He was an insider who decided he understood holiness better than the man God had actually appointed.
The fire didn't fall because he didn't believe in God. It fell because he tried to rewrite what God had already decided. Now move forward, centuries later, to a very different scene, a finished building, a king named Solomon standing in front of a temple that took 7 years and tens of thousands of workers to complete. This is the dedication day. The Ark of the Covenant has just been carried into the inner room, and Solomon has finished praying, a long prayer, asking God to hear Israel whenever they turn back to him. And then it happens again. Fire comes down from heaven and consumes the burnt offering and the sacrifices right there in front of the entire assembly. But this time, something else happens too. The glory of the Lord fills the house so completely that the priests cannot even go inside to do their work. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing centuries later, described this temple as one of the most magnificent structures in the ancient world, and yet even a building that size could not contain what showed up that day. You start to notice something. Every time fire falls, it isn't really about the object it lands on, the rock, the altar, the offering. It's about what the fire is announcing. And this time it announced, "I am here and I intend to stay." There's one more thing you need to see before this pattern gets even bigger. 300 years later, on a mountain called Carmel, a single prophet named Elijah stands against 450 prophets of a god named Baal. The terms are simple: 2 altars, 2 sacrifices, no fire lit by human hands. Whichever God answers with fire is the real one. The prophets of Baal go first. They cry out from morning until noon. They cut themselves with knives until blood runs down their arms, begging their God to respond. Nothing, not a flicker, not a sound. Then Elijah rebuilds a broken-down altar of the Lord, using 12 stones for the 12 tribes of Israel. He digs a trench around it. He has the people drench the sacrifice and the wood with water, not once, but 3 times, until the trench itself is full. Then he prays one sentence. Fire falls from heaven, not just on the offering. The text says it consumes the wood, the stones, the dust, and licks up every drop of water in the trench. There is nothing left to explain away as a lucky spark. The people fall on their faces. "The Lord, He is God," they shout again and again. And you can feel in that moment why fire kept showing up across every one of these stories. It wasn't decoration, it was proof, offered on the terms of the God who never actually needed to prove anything. 3 more stories: a rebellion crushed, a temple filled with glory, a mountain that settled, for 1 generation at least, who the real God of Israel was. Every time, the same signature. Every time, a line between what people believed before and what they could no longer deny after. Before the fire changes what it means, it has to break your heart first. Job is not a rebel. He is not chasing power like Korah, or serving under false pretenses like Nadab and Abihu. The Bible calls him blameless and upright, a man who feared God and turned away from evil. And in a single day, everything is taken from him. A messenger runs to Job with the news. Raiders have stolen his oxen and donkeys, killed his servants. Before that messenger even finishes speaking, another one arrives. The fire of God fell from heaven, he says, and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. Job's flocks and the men caring for them, gone in an instant, by the very same kind of fire that once confirmed Gideon's calling and filled Solomon's temple with glory. This is the one time in Scripture where fire from heaven is not judgment on wickedness, and it is not confirmation of a calling. It's suffering that lands on a righteous man for reasons he is never given, not in this chapter, not for 37 more chapters, and honestly, not fully even by the end of the book. You can sit with how unsettling that is. Sometimes the fire falls, and there is no tidy explanation waiting on the other side of it. Centuries later, two brothers stand on the edge of a Samaritan village with Jesus, and they remember every one of these stories. James and John, the same men Jesus nicknamed Sons of Thunder, watch a village refuse to welcome their teacher. And their response comes instantly. "Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them, just as Elijah did?" You can hear Elijah's name doing all the work in that sentence. They aren't asking a random question. They're asking to repeat the exact miracle from Mount Carmel, this time out of anger instead of faith. Jesus turns and rebukes them. He does not call fire down. He does not punish the village. He simply walks on to another town. What James and John completely misunderstood was which chapter of the story they were living in. The fire that used to fall in judgment was about to fall in a completely different way, on completely different terms, and it would take them years to understand why Jesus said no that day. Now come to Jerusalem, 50 days after the resurrection. A small group of believers, maybe 120 of them, are gathered together in an upper room. Peter is there. John is there, the same John who once asked to call fire down on a village. They are waiting, the way Jesus told them to wait, for a promise they don't fully understand yet. And then, without warning, the sound of a mighty rushing wind fills the entire house, and something appears above them that the text describes as divided tongues like fire, in the Greek, glossai hose puros, resting on each one of them individually. This is the moment. This is the one time fire falls from heaven and does not destroy a single thing it touches. It doesn't land on an altar. It lands on people, ordinary fishermen, tax collectors, women who followed Jesus from Galilee. And instead of consuming them the way it consumed Nadab and Abihu, the way it consumed Korah's 250 men, it fills them. Peter walks out of that room and preaches to a crowd of thousands, the same Peter who denied Jesus 3 times just weeks earlier. Something in him is different now. Something arrived that morning that he didn't have the night before. This is not a story about wind and flame as a special effect. This is not a story about a one-time miracle locked in the 1st century. This is a story about the fire that used to say, "Get back," finally saying, "Come near." And this is where it gets remarkable. Almost 1,700 years later, in a small room on Aldersgate Street in London, a discouraged pastor named John Wesley sat listening to someone read from Martin Luther's preface to the Book of Romans. Wesley later wrote that he felt his heart strangely warmed, and that in that moment he trusted Christ for salvation in a way he never had before, despite years of ministry. No wind, no visible flame, but the same fire, still finding ordinary, tired, uncertain people, and still not destroying them, still changing what they are able to do with the rest of their lives. That is the line this fire has been drawing since Sodom, before and after, except now, after doesn't mean a smoking crater. It means 120 people who walk out of a room able to do things they were never able to do before, and a legacy that reaches all the way to you watching this right now.
So what do you do with all of this? Here is the first thing that's simply true. Fire falls from heaven at least 10 times across Scripture, on a rock, on an altar, on a rebellion, on a temple, on a mountain, on a righteous man, and finally on a room full of ordinary people. Not one of those times was random. Every single one marked a moment God chose on purpose to make himself impossible to ignore. Here's what that means for you. You have probably had moments in your own life that felt like fire falling out of a clear sky, a diagnosis, a door that slammed shut, a door that opened when you least expected it. You didn't get a voice from heaven explaining exactly why. Job didn't either. But the same God who let fire fall on his sheep is the same God who, centuries later, sent fire to fill a room instead of empty one. He has never stopped being the God of both kinds of fire. And here's the last thing, the one I hope you carry out of this video. The fire that used to make people fall on their faces in fear is the same fire Jesus wanted to put inside ordinary, unqualified, unfinished people like Peter, like John, like a discouraged pastor named Wesley 1700 years later, like you. That fire was never meant to stay locked in the book of Acts. It was meant to keep landing on people who were willing to wait in the room for it. Which fire in this video hit you the hardest? The one on the mountain, the one in the temple, or the one that finally, after thousands of years, stopped burning people up and started lighting them up from the inside? Tell me below. Because the same God who sent fire to Elisha's altar is still in the business of sending it to rooms full of ordinary people. Even this one.